Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about this very important two-day official visit of the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan, to Moscow, where he had some very important meetings and discussions. That includes the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin. As we speak, they are having a meeting with the Russian Vice Prime Minister, or the Deputy Prime Minister as they call it. Earlier than that, the Pakistani Foreign Minister, Shah Mahmood Qureshi Sahab, also held a meeting with his counterpart, Mr. Sergei Lavrov, along with the delegation. So we'll be talking about that in detail, that this important and historical visit that took place. I'm talking about the bilateral visit that took place after almost 22, 23 years. How important that is, the timing of this visit, the kind of prospects that we see. Obviously, one major area is about the energy issue, the North-South gas pipeline project. And other than that, obviously, when it comes to the food security of Pakistan, we all know Russia is a major producer of wheat. So discussions regarding that must have been a part, regarding the regional issues. Most important aspect is about Afghanistan and post-Afghanistan situation, where I think Pakistan and Russia can play a very vital role along with the Chinese in bringing in stability in the region, and so forth. So to talk about that, let me quickly introduce you to our panelists. We have with us in our studio, on my right is Farukh Amil Saab. He's the former chair of OIC in Geneva, former ambassador and permanent representative in the United Nations, former ambassador in Japan. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. And from Karachi, we have with us Lieutenant General retired Moinuddin Haider, who's a senior analyst. Thank you so much, General Saab, for your time, sir. Pleasure to have you in the show. And we have with us from United Kingdom, Sami Hamdi Saab. He's the Managing Director of the International Interest. Thank you so much, Sami Hamdi Saab, for your time as well. But let me start off from you, Ambassador. The importance of this very historical visit, sir, that took place after almost 23 years. For the time being, keeping aside the timing of this visit, sir, but that meeting that was supposed to be scheduled for 1 hour between the two heads of state, Imran Khan and Vladimir Putin, ended up after almost 3 hours. So the significance and the importance is there. It shows us exactly what's going on out there, sir. First of all, your take on this visit, sir, and the areas of discussion.
Right, well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me on your show. The first thing I'd like to say, this is a purely bilateral visit. This is a visit that was arranged way before, weeks before, and had nothing to do with the current crisis. So it has to be seen in that context. The second context it must be seen in that is the engagement with Russia following the relationship that we had with Moscow when it was the Soviet Union. And since 2010, successive governments have been engaging with this gradient upwards and having a positive relationship with Moscow because it was required in our region. It's absolutely, this was very much there. So after the last meeting that the Prime Minister had with President Putin, obviously they built up a rapport, and because there are many areas of interest. And so I think you already mentioned the first one was, of course, the biggest problem for Pakistan, and if we talk about national interest, it is Afghanistan next door. Of course there's Kashmir, but Afghanistan next door, and the current problems that country is facing. And so what we've seen in the last few years that Russia has been a responsible partner in the discussions and thinking outside the box, thinking in a way that that is helpful. And so it is required, and they have this, they've had a very negative experience in Afghanistan as the Soviet Union. So this is a really important key area for the Prime Minister and the delegation, and certainly the Foreign Minister, to be engaged on. So that's the first one. The second thing is Pakistan has been pursuing the concept of a peaceful neighborhood. It's been talking about development. So we've got the BRI, the CPEC. So the energy corridors that run across Central Asia and from Russia, because they have the technology and, of course, they have the resources. They have the the north-south, the energy pipeline. It is absolutely critical for Pakistan as we try to develop our economy. and with a growing population, it is we need it even more. So this is something that is purely bilateral, but it also has an international dimension, a multilateral dimension, because obviously it has to cross many countries. And when you have energy corridors and you have trade and business, so it's in the vision of the government's idea, in my opinion, that to have connectivity through business, through trade, through energy, and this is a very important thing. The other important thing that I suspect has warmed the Prime Minister even more, this is something that matters to everybody in Muslim countries, and that is Islamophobia.
Absolutely.
So when you have, when President Putin made that statement or the tweet about that, and the Prime Minister responded in a very warm way, that touched the hearts of millions of people across the Ummah. Yeah. It's very, very important. And so if there's of course there has to be discussion on this. I can't see that, how can that not be an important aspect, because ultimately it's the people of Pakistan who, it's a huge issue here, and we're a conservative country. And if there's an insult of our religion, of our Prophet, peace be upon him, then of course it is of paramount importance to us. But when President Putin comes along and says this, gives this very understanding position, which basically talks about interfaith harmony, and then of course they built a huge, I think, I'm sure PTV's covered this before, this huge masjid, this huge mosque in Russia, in Moscow. I think a few years ago they had the inauguration of it, and the president himself was there.
So there are about 25 million Muslims who live in Russia, so obviously that's quite important.
But there are 210 million Muslims who live in India, but look what's happening to them.
Exactly.
So the thing is, at least, so these are the three, I think, the three biggies. Of course, the crisis that is ongoing, that obviously had to be discussed somewhere, but I don't think for any reason why Pakistan should have to take any sides on this, because
we have been very, very clear that we do not want to be a part of any bloc.
That's right.
I mean,
that's right. And
absolutely.
It serves no interest for either for Pakistan to be in that, and I think the people who are watching this visit, and I've seen all these critics, I mean, they're coming from the other side of the border. Obviously, they want to play that up, and they'll say, well, it's...
And they are.
But can you imagine if one had listened to that point of view and this visit had been called off? And that would have been a monumental mistake. And that would be... Because the West is not physically at war with Russia. The Russians did not call this a visit off and say, look, we're fighting a war, you better stay at home. No, this is a bilateral visit that was pre-arranged before this present crisis. And it had to go ahead because it's not about Ukraine. It's absolutely not about Ukraine.
It's an absolute bilateral engagement.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Now coming to you, General Saab. First of all, sir, I would like you to comment on this particular visit of the Prime Minister to Moscow, sir. Secondly, sir, if a bilateral visit of this sort is taking place after almost 22, 23 years, the last time it was Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif in 1999. Sir, what has changed over a period of time? Though we do not want to be a part of any bloc, but yes, one thing is for sure, that we want to keep Pakistan as a neutral country, sir. Do you think, sir, this particular visit would help us do that? What sort of areas are there where we can really cooperate with Russia also, sir?
Yes, I think over the years, relationship between Pakistan and Russia have been improving slowly and gradually. And cooperation in Shanghai conference, through that one also, there have been meetings. And Russians say that once the Soviets had attacked Afghanistan and Pakistan was helping Afghanistan, so on that score they were not too happy with us. But they say once that has been now settled and it is behind us, they can look forward to better relationship. And secondly, Pakistan is trying for a balancing act. It wants to improve relations with everybody, especially with its neighbors. And Russia is a sort of neighbor with us, rather than many other countries which are far away from us. So, although the trade volume between Russia and Pakistan is not too high, but Russia has vast energy resources, which of course it is supplying to many countries of Europe and others. And Pakistan is also hoping that through Afghanistan, when the CPEC really starts functioning, we will have also utilizing, their energy reservoirs. And this pipeline is very important to us. And I am not quite sure now that Germany, which had almost, signed this pipeline with them, in spite of American US pressure not to go for this pipeline. But now, of course, I think Germany has said that for the timing they are pending it, or they will not going to proceed till the Ukraine matter is settled. So Russia is a very important country. It is coming up economically and otherwise. It is gaining strength, and it has started challenging the West on many foreign policy issues in many parts of the world. So it's an important country. I see one more important aspect of this. If you know, the steel mill was given to us by Russia. Electrical and mechanical complex were given to us by China, both communist countries. And West, of course, did help us through PL 480. That gave us fish, but they gave us basic technology. Secondly, if you remember, after 1965 war, in the Tashkent conference, they brought India and Pakistan together, and the ceasefire was agreed in Tashkent. And they were good arbitrators. They have, quite close to India, and we hope that with their influence on India, India is basically dependent upon Russian arms in a big way, so they listen to him. So we hope that on Kashmir or on bilateral trade or by bilateral relations between India and Pakistan, Russia can play a very important role as compared to West, which have really not done anything.
I was about to ask you
Kashmir.
about this. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. So we
Jalsa,
hope
yeah.
they will use their influence to ease the tensions between India and Pakistan. Also, you mentioned about Islamophobia, and President Putin in the last few months and years has shown he has talk of justice, that there should be no Islamophobia, there should be no discrimination, and I hope they will prevail on India, not to mistake their very large majority of over 200 million Muslims, the way they are doing it today. So I am quite sure our Prime Minister must have raised this problem with them, and we should hope something better coming out of this situation.
All right. Now coming to you, Sami Hamdi Saab, one important factor which was just mentioned by General Moinuddin Haider is about the role of Russia, sir. Let's talk about the relationship between Pakistan and India. It's been very hostile over a period of time. We always thought that the Americans will play a positive role, but now the Americans call them the strategic partners, whereas Pakistan, they have always considered us as transactional partners. Now, do you think, sir, Russians can actually play a major role? Because the way we have seen the relationship between Pakistan and Russia improving over the last decade or so, and the post-2014, the way Sino-Russian engagement has really been very interesting, and they have been very close now. I mean, during the last visit, I was shocked to know that the bilateral trade between Russia and China was almost hovering around $220 billion. And obviously, a lot more contracts have also been signed during this particular visit. Now, sir, when you see Russia playing a very dominant role, getting so close to China, obviously that is going to help Pakistan. Afghanistan we'll definitely talk about. But do you think these two countries, and in particular Russia, can play a vital role in bringing in peace as far as subcontinent is concerned, or rather the kind of influence the Indians were under as far as Russia is concerned, sir, that can play a positive role?
I think it's important to highlight that in recent times there's been a very aggressive push on the part of Washington, on the part of the US, to really assert itself in the region and assert itself against China. In particular, there's been a really aggressive approach on the part of Washington in order to create some sort of alliance by which they can push back against China. this idea that China is the number one culprit, China is the number one foreign policy priority. And this is why that we've seen a particular excitement on the part of US policymakers in a bid to try to boost relations with India. The idea being that India's historical relations with Russia, that the US can supplant that and the US can become ideally the main partner of India, even if India perhaps is being very careful with this. We know that the US and India clashed over India's suggestion that it would buy missiles and buy weapons from Russia. But the reason I mention that is that it's important to look at Russia's own influence in the region in this particular context, in that the US is trying to form this anti-China bloc, and there is an awareness on the part of China and Russia that there should also be a bloc in order to resist this increasingly aggressive US approach in the region. And this is why I think there are two important dynamics that have taken place that have facilitated this visit by the Prime Minister Imran Khan to Moscow. The first is that there is increasing coldness in the relationship between Pakistan and the US. As you suggested before, the US calls India a strategic ally, but sees its relationship with Pakistan as transactional. And that's because Pakistan on numerous occasions has put its foot down, has said, has said to Washington, listen, I don't believe that your interest or your policy is conducive to my own interests, and that you should be listening more to me, you should be listening more to Islamabad. And that has infuriated Washington and resulted in this sort of cold relations emerging between Washington and between Islamabad. The second dynamic that has emerged is that Russia and Pakistan are no longer competing with regards to Afghanistan. Russia is no longer interested in expanding in Afghanistan the way it did in the 1980s and the like, and there is no longer a war necessarily that pushes Pakistan to support one side over the other. In other words, now you have an Afghanistan that has the potential to hurt every one of the powers that surround Afghanistan, every one of the powers in the region, and therefore there is an imperative to work together, to sit together, to have dialogue together, particularly given that Washington has no particular policy on Afghanistan. It's taking money that belongs to the Afghans and deciding to use it for itself in order to compensate victims of 9/11. In other words, punishing an Afghan population that had nothing to do with it for the actions of some deranged lunatics. I think that when it comes to Afghanistan, Pakistan and Russia realize that there needs to be dialogue, they need to sit down together, they need to come to some sort of regional framework within which to accommodate Afghanistan and help to facilitate its rehabilitation in a manner that does not hurt neither Pakistan nor Russia. And I think it's these important dynamics that drift away from Washington and Afghanistan that have facilitated this relationship. The direct answer to your question, the reason I started is because it directly links to the answer to your question, which is that relations between Pakistan and India are no longer uniquely between Pakistan and India. The Washington factor is very important. For Washington, it is about pushing back against China, and therefore Pakistan is only a good ally insofar as it helps Washington with this, and India is only a good ally insofar as it helps Washington in this. And therefore the expectations that Washington has for Pakistan and for India are such that it makes any reconciliation very difficult between them, given that Pakistan believes, and rightly so, that Washington is not looking out for Pakistan's interest. It expects Pakistan to pay a price for pursuing Washington's interest, and Islamabad is saying, listen, I'm not prepared to do that anymore, and I'm prepared to develop more relations now with China, with Russia, to become this neutral party in order to ensure that my interest, I'm able to tackle my own economic issues, I'm able to tackle my own political issues. The one final point I want to make is this. There is this assertion that Pakistan is trying to be neutral, but one thing that's worth noting is this. Pakistan has the potential to become strong, and that's why it cannot become neutral. That's why it will not be allowed to be neutral. For Russia, having Pakistan as a friend is a huge boon. It's a huge gain for the likes of Russia, which is trying to push back against the US. It's a huge gain for China that is trying to push back against the US. And the reality is that there are blocs forming, and it makes sense for Imran Khan to believe that I cannot put all my eggs in one basket. I must have dialogue channels with everybody else. And this is why he welcomes this visit to Moscow. This is why it's a good thing for Pakistan, irrespective of the events that are unfolding in Ukraine and elsewhere.
All right. Now, Ambassador, one important point, and that is about the dependence of Pakistan on Washington. Always been, historically, we were always a part of the West. Even during this so-called war on terror, we were the frontline ally and a non-NATO ally. But whatever we went through during the last 20, 21 years, we all know we really suffered. But now, sir, things have changed over a period of time. One thing is for sure, sir, that let's suppose because of this Ukrainian crisis, the West, I was watching all the television channels and we got to know that a lot of strict sanctions will be imposed on Russia, and one of the statement was pretty interesting to hear, that it could bring Russia close to where Iran is. So, if sanctions are imposed on Russia, so do you think whatever we desire to achieve by getting close to Russia will be achieved or not?
Right. My take on this is that we're not, this government is not here to alienate existing friends. So as I said from at the beginning, that this is a bilateral visit, and this was in no way meant to be to signal that we don't like you Washington, we don't like you London, we're fed up with Brussels.
Net Price said that we are watching it very closely.
Yes, of course they're watching it. Everybody's watching it because it's the first visit that's taken place straight after the crisis, the ongoing crisis. But the issue here is that Pakistan has an important relationship with Washington, London, and Brussels, and that is not going to be jettisoned overnight. We're not just. I don't think the foreign minister and the prime minister are going to suddenly just say, "Oh, let's all rush to the Russian camp now." I don't think that's going to happen, and because Pakistan is all. I mean, it's been said we're not joining any blocs. We're looking for Pakistan's national economic interests, and those economic interests mean the north-south gas, the energy pipeline, and that is of importance to us. And Afghanistan, Russia has shown in the last several years that it is a responsible and a partner that can help the regional solutions, and
they genuinely wanted that.
Right. So the issue is this is not like sayonara Washington. It's not that, because there are many other countries with the Pakistan has important relations with. Look what was said in Tokyo. Look what was said in many other countries. The interesting debate that will take place is how these sanctions will take place, at what level, how that will impact upon the energy corridor and Russia's ability to finance or to build whatever they're supposed to be building. If you remember, there was the Iran, Pakistan, India gas pipeline.
IPI.
So the IPI, where did it go? Because of those sanctions on Iran. Russia is not Iran. Russia is in a very different league. Pakistan is not party to the arms controls discussion that is taking place in Europe.
But sir, may I put another question here? If you remember, that was the time when Mr. Ahmadinejad was the president in Iran, right? Asif Zardari Saab was the president in Pakistan, and he himself went there in Iran. So that gas pipeline was almost complete up till their border, and Ahmadinejad, despite the fact that they were under sanctions, said that we can invest 250 million US dollars in Pakistan so that they can complete the project. Later on, Nawaz Sharif Saab came in and he had a tilt towards the West. Everything which was finalized at that time, nothing happened regarding that.
Well, I mean, that's a separate subject from this evening's. But you see, the first thing was the Indians chickened out.
But we chickened out.
No, I think the Indians chickened out. The Indians chickened out because it was IPI. Suddenly, the Indians were gone because they were given that the civil nuclear deal with by the Americans and other countries, including Japan. So, your original question is that. This is not a slap in the face of any other country. Pakistan has very strong multilateral credentials. We will have to see what plays out at the Security Council. India is currently a non-permanent member, so they have their own. They have to deal with it themselves. And of course, we are on the Human Rights Council. So of course, there's all issues of human rights abuses, civilian populations. The Russians are saying X, Y, Z. The Ukrainians are saying X, Y, Z. The other issue is, and it's a larger issue, and that is the issue where a sovereign country has been, quote, invaded. And these are very tricky issues that will take place as the multilateral process goes forward in New York and in Geneva. But this visit is not about that. This visit is about Pakistan's, the culmination, and I think the foresight to move ahead with Russia in a big way without the Ukraine issue taking place. So we must look at it outside that. Of course, our detractors will say, this is, how silly of them. But I think the sensible diplomats, and there's plenty of them here in Islamabad, will be reporting back to their capitals and saying, this is not about, a shift in a strategic alliance? Of course not. It isn't. If you look at where FATF is, you look at where the IFIs are, you look at the IMF program, you've got to take all of those into consideration. And so you have to have balanced relations with everybody.
I think that is the way forward. That is the only way forward. I mean, how to
It's
create that kind of an equilibrium.
Pragmatic way
Absolutely. Pragmatic approach. Jalsa, I remember when Mr. Donald Trump took charge, we all thought that most likely Hillary Clinton would become the president, but Donald Trump became, and later on Mr. Biden is the president. Mr. Biden has also served twice as the vice president along with Mr. Barack Obama. So whenever I would listen to their speeches, they would always consider China, they would always consider Russia as their as aggressive countries, as their rivals, and on top as the top two adversaries. Now, sir, a country like Pakistan, I mean, we have been a very close ally with the United States of America, whether you talk about the war in Afghanistan on terror, or even earlier when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, we were again a part of that war. We have always, kept that Western side very close to us. Now, what is being witnessed is pretty interesting, and that says that the areas where there could be a lot of convergence is not with the Americans, sir. It seems more like with the Chinese and the Russians. The divergence seems to be on a lot of issues with the Americans. What is that supposed to mean, sir? Something new in our foreign policy?
We have been, in everybody's eyes, a very close ally of the West. Don Foster Dulles, their foreign secretary, said that Pakistan is the cornerstone of our foreign policy in South Asia. And there was this CETO, Centro, Medap, and what not. And a U-2 flew from a Pakistani base against Russia. So we had taken sides at that time. And secondly, we must also understand that the West does not like our friendship with China, but we have been steadfast in saying that we have our bilateral interests, and at the same time we kept good relations with America as well as West and with China. And we never, on this issue, we never abandoned them, and of course it helped America to establish relations through Kissinger and Nixon with China, and they both benefited from this relationship economically. Now, there is no doubt that there is a new bloc emerging. Russia and China are coming close, and on Afghanistan issue, the Taliban have gone to China as well as to Russia on their invitation, because they're interested to solve their problems. And they want to see peace in Afghanistan, because that will open up Central Asian states and Russia, and this energy corridor will become very meaningful. But of course, sanctions, as you know, the United States and Britain, everybody is putting sanctions. Let us see how it will affect, because in the same way we have not been able to make this Iran-Pakistan pipeline because of these such restrictions. But our balancing act, I think, should be viewed by the world in the correct perspective. We want to keep good relations with everybody. Our national and our Prime Minister has spelled out that he likes to keep good relations with neighbors and with everybody. At the same time, work for Pakistan's national interest. He says he will not fight anybody's war anymore. He has made it very clear. That means we have suffered enough, and our experience with the United States is that whenever they need it, they come and extract a lot of blood and resources from us, and as soon as their task is done, they abandon and leave. This has been our experience. There is no doubt about this fact. So it is very essential for Pakistan to have balanced relations, especially with powerful neighbors around and close to Pakistan. That doesn't mean that we will not have relations with the West and with America. We'll continue to have relations with them. We'd like to strengthen them. Let us see what they can do for us.
Jalsa, because what we have learned that the Prime Minister and the Russian President Vladimir Putin, they had a very long talk. It was around 3 hours, that's what we have learned. Now, areas obviously such as energy was discussed. Economics is obviously the new name of the game, economic diplomacy as they call it. One area is very important, sir, and that is about defense. Because if you remember, even General Rahil, then General Bajwa, and the military was very much engaged with the Russians. And what we have witnessed was something pretty interesting when we saw around 200, 250 Russian commandos coming to Pakistan and having joint exercises with the Pakistani military. Then they were taken to Cherat, I think the first military ever. Now, that shows the kind of engagement they have at various levels. So, as far as defense is concerned, so we have been relying on the Americans for a very long time. Then there is a shift towards the Chinese military hardware. How much benefit can Pakistan get from the Russian military hardware, sir? And do you think that is going to be an appropriate move?
I think there are certain weapon systems in which Russians excel, and their air defense systems are very effective. Some of their helicopters are as good as the from the West. So there is a lot of room for collaboration and cooperation in this field. And we had taken tanks from the erstwhile Soviet Union, the Central Asian states. They were Russian basically equipment. We are taking tanks also. So Pakistan, I think, in this field can cooperate with them. And apart from this, at one time Pakistan was exporting a lot of footwear and shirts and textiles to Soviet Union and later on to Russia. But now it has come down. But I am sure there will be a boost again in this. Secondly, you see the importance of this visit. That Russia is at war with Ukraine. President Putin has declared war. At the same time, a 1-hour visit, which was scheduled, went on for over 3 hours.
Correct.
Which shows that they had important, points to discuss and important issues to discuss. And I'm quite sure it will balance Pakistan's foreign policy, and it will do us good in the long run.
I think very well said, sir. I think it's all about balancing the foreign policy, and I would quote the late Akram Zaki Saab. So he would always say that one thing was about the internal policy is the reflection of your external policy. And secondly, more friends you have, more friends you make. That is the right approach rather than having more foes or enemies. So I think Pakistan had a very cold relationship with the Soviets and later on with the Russians, but now things are getting a lot better, sir. They are looking to come towards south. We are trying to approach the Central Asian countries as well. And obviously there is a lot what we can get from there. There is a lot of benefit for Pakistan, especially when it comes to the Afghan issue, sir. Now, one important factor, Sami Saab, is, which is I would say the main core issue is Afghanistan, sir. Americans left Afghanistan the second time, and in a haste, in a hurry, without even informing the Afghan military or the high-ups. And whatever happened, they ended up blaming Pakistan. So there is a lot of trust deficit between the two agencies or the two countries, and within various different ranks also. Now, sir, in order to bring stability in Afghanistan through the cash, through support, through food security, looking after their health issues, the education for that part, do you think if we minus United States of America for the moment, because they've frozen their accounts, and then we are also learning that 50% of the money they had, that was the Afghan money, they would be giving it to the victims of the 9/11. Now, tell us that China with Russians, I mean, obviously Pakistan has a lot of economic issues, financial issues, we have a crunch. These two countries can look after the affairs in Afghanistan, and if Afghanistan is stabilized, things would be better, because we all thought that, Afghan Taliban ended up having weapons worth around $80, $85 billion, and they have got everything now. and they'll be able to sort out the issues. But sir, eventually money matters, number one. And secondly, that those weapons are not only with the Afghan Taliban, they're scattered. Is that an issue? Is that a threat for the region also? And it seems that the Americans left that on purpose.
I think it's important to make clear that Afghanistan is an issue that all of China, Russia, Pakistan, and everybody else around the region, including India, are worried about. And it's important to highlight that while the Americans left Afghanistan in a mess, even the ally that they are trying to woo, which is India, even with the relations with India, they didn't even liaise with the Indians. And this is what caused a lot of consternation, even in New Delhi, over the manner in which the Americans withdrew from Afghanistan and the chaotic manner in which they withdrew from Afghanistan. I think the issue with Afghanistan is the nature of the agency that the Taliban have in Afghanistan. By that, I mean that the Taliban are not necessarily a proxy, nor do they want to be a proxy, nor will they accept being a proxy, but rather want to be treated as an equal with Pakistan, with China, with Russia, equal in the sense that they have territorial integrity and that Afghanistan is a sovereign nation that should be respected. And I think here is where perhaps there are sensitivities towards to what extent the Taliban can be worked with in order to improve Afghanistan, not necessarily from Islamabad, but indeed from Beijing and perhaps somewhat from Moscow as well. There's also question marks over what will Washington do regarding Afghanistan. It's clear that Washington doesn't want to release funds. Will they impose sanctions on Afghanistan? Will that complicate the process of trying to work towards a framework that incorporates Afghanistan into the region, rehabilitates Afghanistan into the region? But putting Washington out of the picture for a second, I think it is abundantly clear that China, Russia, and Pakistan have a major role to play in helping to rehabilitate Afghanistan and to take advantage of the opportunities that are presented in Afghanistan while India tries to weigh up what it should do with regards to the Taliban. I think the reality is that the Taliban now, as you said, they're looking for cash, they're looking for investment, they're looking for the ability to rebuild Afghanistan, they're looking for international recognition. In other words, the Taliban are in a position where they're prepared to compromise more than they have ever been throughout or since their inception. I think that when it comes to trying to deal with Afghanistan in and of itself, I think the reality is that we have the vision that is presented by Imran Khan, by the Prime Minister of Pakistan, which is this idea that we should adopt it from a humanitarian perspective and that there is no solution with arms. And I think that side point going to this point about emphasizing that Pakistan is pursuing Russia in a bilateral ties and not trying to be part of a bloc, I think this is emblematic and a symbol of what Imran Khan has come to represent in terms of his politics, in that it's all about dialogue, even if people are criticizing who he's having this dialogue with. But the idea that dialogue is a solution, given that war has been tried over and over again, has brought no solutions. I think that if Pakistan can lead on this initiative in the manner that it has tried to do with the OIC, I think it can reach an agreement with China, with Russia, to find a regional solution to facilitate aid into Afghanistan, to facilitate investment into Afghanistan without necessarily empowering the Taliban in a way in which perhaps might lead them to hurt the rest of the region. I do think that here there needs to be a very cautious, very calculated approach in terms of how to approach Afghanistan. But in regards to your question, it's abundantly clear that given that Washington has no idea what it wants to do in Afghanistan, there is an imperative on Pakistan, China, and Russia to come together to try to find a solution. And it may well be that this trio are able to find a very effective solution, given that China's policy in the past has been to help financially without political strings attached. Moscow has offered financial assistance in the past to other countries without political restrictions attached. It may well be that these countries might actually be able to rehabilitate Afghanistan in a way that renders it no longer a source for headache or terrorism or the like, or these other words that are used, that it has been in the past.
All right. Now, so a couple of questions regarding the trade opportunities. So steel industry is another very important area, sir. Unfortunately, we haven't done anything in that regard, sir. We were always depending. But now, sir, you believe that the Russians can really, because they have always helped us in that regard. They have the capacity also and now the willingness. Steel industry. Second is about the support on Kashmir, sir. I think because that also brings in a lot of value if a statement is issued by Kremlin that we would like to see Kashmir being resolved as per the UN consultation and the way we should move forward. So let's talk about the steel industry, because this is where we believe that, you know, if Pakistan can, Pakistan should.
Well, I don't know very much about the steel industry in Pakistan, but I can certainly say that the Russians, in terms of their technology, there was a discussion earlier on in comments about whether they could provide us in terms of the military hardware. The Russians, remember, they're the first people who put, the Soviets put Yuri Gagarin into space, and you know, you look at their technologies and the hypersonic aircraft that they're building. I mean,
In the engine manufacturing
so
in particular.
they have excellent.
So JF-17 Thunder is one example. We're using their engines.
So they have excellent technologies. Now, whether those technologies can be applied in the economic and in the trade sense, in particular, you're talking about the steel industry, I can see that the more of the technologies that would come about are, you know, perhaps in the IT, perhaps much more in the finished goods industry. So, for example, Pakistan is an agricultural country. Most of our produce, unfortunately, like we're going to have a bumper crop of potatoes, we just don't know
What to do with it?
Yes, so we don't know how to, you know, a canning factory. So it's not just it's not just about steel, but it's all about the secondary and tertiary industries where you can improve and have value addition to whatever you're producing in Pakistan. So like China, and certainly China is way ahead in all of this, but the Russians could certainly help us in that area. Of course, you know, they have a dwindling population, but we have excellent agricultural products that we could sell, you know, we could sell to them. I don't know the issue about whether you can have barter trade as well. I mean, this is Pakistan's been doing this very successfully recently, and in the past it's done this. So we're able to work closely with the Russians, but it depends now in terms of the sanctions that the West is threatening the Russians with, what constraints those sanctions will impose on them, and how those will factor into how Russia is able to conduct its trade and business
So we are
activities
largely
abroad.
dependent on the United States of America and the European Union as far as our exports are concerned.
Well, that's it.
So that we have to keep that in account as well.
Well, that's why I think that, you know, the government is very clear about having, you know, we want to have good relations with everybody, and this whole thing about economic diplomacy, it's nothing new. Pakistan's been doing it for years. If you look at the origins of the CPEC, this is economic diplomacy. This is happening. It's always been happening, because it's now being given another a gloss finish, I would say, but. With the Russians, there are many areas that we could cooperate with, because the Russians have been producing civilian aircraft, for example. You know, you have a burgeoning aviation industry here as well. If the constraints are removed, and, you know, they can, if Pakistan, I wish they could, I wish we could have an aviation industry which is comparable to what is happening on the other side of the border, so that more and more airlines, as long as they meet the safety and safety requirements, are allowed to bring air travel to the common citizen. I mean, it has got better, but if you look at, if you fly from Ankara to Istanbul, how cheap that is, and it's the distance if you fly from Islamabad to Karachi, there's no comparison in the fares in Turkey or even in India. So the Russians have built, and the Chinese have built all these civilian aircraft. There are many areas, and I think on one of your next programs you should have a very competent ambassador who is sitting in Moscow, because he would tell you even more.
But sir, a quick comment regarding Kashmir, sir.
Right. On Kashmir, the thing is, this is so far Russia has been, you know, because it has excellent relations with New Delhi. I can't see them stepping forward right now and saying something that would please us. There's no incentive for them to do it. And there is no, when you have your own, many of your Muslim countries are also a little bit reluctant, and, you know, barring Malaysia and Iran and Turkey, big players. But if they're not going to say it, they will say it at the OIC. They will say it at the OIC.
Their tilt towards India now, it's very obvious. Look at Saudi Arabia, look at, for example, UAE or Bahrain. Highest civil awards were given to Narendra Modi. We all know that. So
they have a very important relationship with India. They're not going to jettison that overnight, depending on, because of what is happening in Ukraine. how this visit is taking place. Of course, the assessment of the visit will only take place once the Prime Minister comes back, and what the Foreign Minister has to say, what the Prime Minister himself has to say, what was said, what was agreed on, and how they move forward. But the bottom line here is it is showing Moscow, and it is showing President Putin that even at a difficult moment, Pakistan is not afraid. It will just do the right thing because it's in our national interest to have a strong bilateral relationship.
I think,
with
sir, at the end of
Beijing.
the day, you're absolutely spot on that your national interest is your first and foremost priority. That is it.
So we want good relations with Washington, London, Brussels,
Everywhere.
Beijing, Moscow,
So
everybody.
this is how it should be.
And that is how we would be able to cement the support and understanding on what is happening and the cruelties that are happening in Kashmir.
Absolutely, sir. Anyway, sir, since I'm running out of time, but I would really like to thank you very much for your time, sir. It was a pleasure having you in the show. General Moin, thank you so much for your time, sir. And I would love to have you in the shows most likely next week, sir. But thank you very much for the time being. And our dear friend in UK, Sami Hamdi, thank you very much for your comments also and for your presence in our show as well. And that's all we have for this. I'll see you again. Till then, you take good care. Khuda Hafiz.